Have you ever wondered if the richest people in the world are actually the poorest? It's a controversial thought, isn't it? We're taught to believe that money can buy anything, but it can't buy kindness, it can't manufacture destiny, and it certainly can't build a fortress strong enough to protect a lonely heart. This is a story about that very idea. It's about a powerful billionaire, CEO Colton Griffin, a man who lived in a sterile world of contracts and commands, who believed he could acquire an heir the same way he acquired companies with a signature and a check. And then there's Serenity Morgan, a woman with a quiet strength and a wealth of character that could humble any empire. She enters his life as a surrogate, what he sees as a simple transactional solution to his problem. But what he doesn't know is that Hayes just invited a force of nature into his perfectly controlled world, a woman whose kindness will become the ultimate plot twist in his calculated life. Their professional arrangement soon becomes a deeply emotional love story he is completely unprepared for. This story builds to a single heart-stopping moment. Just as the surrogate mom is about to walk away forever with their contract fulfilled, she turns and whispers 3 secret words, and in that instant, the CEO's heart explodes. The realization of what Hayes about to lose hits him with the force of a tidal wave, and he has no choice but to run to stop her from disappearing from his life. What could she possibly have said to shatter the defenses of a man like him? What could be so powerful it would lead to a desperate chase and a public confession? We believe that true wealth is found in connection, redemption, and the courage to love. This story is your reward for daring to believe that too. It's a heart-aching journey about overcoming pride and discovering that the greatest treasures in life are never for sale. We'd love to know how far our story is reaching, so please comment below and tell us what beautiful city you're watching from today. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next, and please share this with someone you know who will be touched by this story of surprise and destiny. Well, you see, destiny has a funny way of showing up, doesn't it? It's often not in the grand cinematic moments, but in the quietest whispers, the ones that carry the weight of a secret story. For a man like the billionaire Colton Griffin, a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, the idea of destiny was a foreign concept. His world was one of contracts and calculated outcomes, a place where emotion was a liability. But all that was about to change, a plot twist he never saw coming. The air in the grand sterile foyer was thick with unspoken words, a heavy blanket of heartbreak and fulfilled obligations. Serenity Morgan, the surrogate who had been a fleeting yet profound chapter in his life, stood by the door. Her bag was packed, her expression a careful mask of dignity, but her eyes held a universe of emotional turmoil. She had upheld her end of the bargain, a journey of overcoming her own feelings for the sake of a promise. It was, for all intents and purposes, the end of their story. Colton watched her, a strange tightness in his chest he couldn't quite decipher. This was the plan, after all. A simple, clean transaction. Yet, the finality of her departure felt wrong. It was an unexpected pang, a feeling that went against every logical fiber in his CEO brain. He thought of the kindness she'd shown, a gentle counterpoint to his rigid world. This moment wasn't supposed to be this complicated, this heart-aching. He was just supposed to let her go. As she reached for the polished brass handle, Serenity paused, her shoulders slumping for just a fraction of a second. She turned back, her gaze meeting his across the cavernous space. The look in her eyes wasn't one of accusation or anger, but of a deep, resonant sadness that struck a chord deep within him. It was a look that communicated a profound love story that had been written in the margins of their contract, one he had been too blind to read. Then, she leaned in ever so slightly, the barest of movements, and whispered 3 secret words. They weren't meant to be a confession, not a plea, but a simple, devastating truth that floated across the marble floor. These 3 words were a surprise arrow, bypassing all his defenses and piercing him straight through the heart. They revealed a depth of connection he hadn't known was possible, a bond forged in shared moments and silent understanding. Her words detonated in the silence of his carefully constructed world, shattering the illusion of control he held so dear. It was an emotional explosion, a cataclysmic plot twist that changed everything in an instant. Suddenly, the billionaire CEO wasn't a master of the universe, he was just a man on the verge of the ultimate heartbreak. He had to stop her. He had to understand. But what could have been so powerful to make a man like him run? You have to understand that for a man like Colton Griffin, legacy wasn't just a wish, it was a corporate mandate, the next logical acquisition in a life built on them. The powerful CEO needed an heir, a successor to the Griffin empire, and he approached this personal matter with the same detached precision he used for a hostile takeover. Emotion was a messy variable, something to be mitigated and controlled. And the surrogacy agreement with a woman named Serenity Morgan was his ultimate mitigation strategy. It was a contract, pure and simple. In his mind, the arrangement was flawless, a clean transaction designed to deliver a specific outcome with no strings attached. He vetted candidates with his legal team, searching for someone reliable, healthy, and most importantly, someone who understood the boundaries. Serenity Morgan's profile was perfect. She was sensible, had no complicated ties, and seemed to grasp the professional nature of the deal. The billionaire saw her not as a person, but as a partner in a very temporary, very specific venture. A vessel for his legacy. The pages of the contract were thick, filled with clauses and subclauses that covered every conceivable contingency. It was a fortress of legal jargon designed to keep feelings at bay, a testament to Colton's fear of personal entanglement. This wasn't about building a family, it was about securing a bloodline. He viewed the entire process as a project, with milestones and deliverables. The heart-aching nuances of creating a life were lost on him, buried under the cold, hard logic of a CEO. He signed the papers in his high-rise office, the city lights twinkling below like a conquered kingdom. For him, this was just another deal being closed, another problem being solved with wealth and influence. The idea of a love story, of shared vulnerability, was laughable. This was about overcoming a biological hurdle, not about forging a connection. Serenity was the solution, the surrogate who would fulfill her role and then disappear, leaving him with the one thing his money couldn't create from thin air. And so, the stage was set for a journey that Colton believed he could control from start to finish. He anticipated a 9-month period of detached oversight, of ensuring the terms were met before the final payment was made. What he failed to account for was the human element, the unpredictable variable that is kindness and quiet strength. He had insulated his heart from the world, but he was about to invite a woman into his home who operated on a completely different currency. The ink dried, the deal was done, and the first check was sent. The powerful CEO leaned back in his leather chair, satisfied with his cold, calculated plan. He had accounted for everything, or so he thought. He had no idea that this simple business contract was in fact an invitation for destiny to walk right through his front door, threatening to dismantle the lonely, sterile world he had so carefully built around himself. The day Serenity Morgan arrived, the mansion seemed to hold its breath. It was a place of polished surfaces and echoing silence, a museum curated by a billionaire rather than a home lived in by a man. Every object was placed with intention, every corridor empty and cold. It was the physical manifestation of Colton Griffin's soul, impressive, powerful, and profoundly lonely. Then, she stepped across the threshold, carrying a single suitcase and an aura of quiet warmth that was utterly alien to the space. She wasn't intimidated by the grandeur, a surprise to the staff accustomed to fawning visitors. Instead, her eyes took in the sterile beauty with a hint of something that looked like sympathy. Her presence was a gentle ripple in a stagnant pond. It was in the way she smiled at the housekeeper, a genuine expression of kindness that seemed to brighten the marble foyer. She didn't walk with the entitlement of his usual associates. She moved with a quiet integrity that felt real. This was a stark contrast to the world Colton inhabited. His life was a revolving door of people who wanted something from him, their smiles as calculated as his business deals. Serenity's kindness wasn't a strategy, it was just who she was. She spoke in soft tones, her words chosen with care, a heart-aching sincerity that was both disarming and, to Colton, slightly confusing. She was the living, breathing antithesis of his fiancée's sharp-edged ambition. Her first days were marked by small, almost imperceptible changes. A wildflower shed picked from the garden, placed in a small vase on a forgotten side table. The scent of chamomile tea brewing in the kitchen late at night. These were tiny acts of homemaking in a house that had never been a home. They were gestures that sought nothing in return, born from an innate goodness he hadn't encountered before. For Serenity, this wasn't just a contract, it was a life she was nurturing. Colton observed this from a distance, a silent CEO watching a foreign element in his controlled experiment. He had expected a surrogate who would remain invisible, a shadow in the West Wing who followed the rules. He did not expect someone whose simple presence would challenge the very foundation of his life. Her integrity was a quiet rebellion against the transactional nature of their agreement, a secret language his wealth couldn't translate. He found himself thinking about her at odd times, this woman who was carrying his heir. Her gentle nature was a puzzle. It was so different from the cutthroat environment he thrived in, a world where kindness was often mistaken for weakness. He had thought this would be simple, but with every quiet, unassuming action, Serenity Morgan was introducing an emotional complexity he was completely unprepared to handle. At first, Colton Griffin's reaction wasn't curiosity, it was irritation. A low-level, simmering annoyance that he couldn't quite articulate. These small acts of kindness from Serenity were, in his view, a breach of their meticulously crafted agreement. He was the CEO of his own life, and she was an employee, a surrogate, not a homemaker. Her attempts to bring warmth into his sterile world felt like an overstep, a blurring of professional lines he had drawn so clearly. Had come home one evening to find a plate of homemade cookies on the kitchen island with a simple note, thought, "You might like these." He stared at them, not with gratitude, but with a flicker of anger. This wasn't in the contract. This emotional gesture was an unnecessary complication, a variable he hadn't planned for. He saw it as a subtle attempt to manipulate the situation, to create a personal connection where none was required or wanted. It was an unwelcome surprise. The same annoyance flared when he found Shed organized a section of his library, a space no one had dared touch in years. She hadn't been snooping, she had simply noticed the chaos and brought order to it. But to Colton, it felt like an invasion, a quiet judgment on his lonely life. Who was she to do this? This was his fortress, and her gentle touches felt like tiny cracks appearing in his defenses. This wasn't about overcoming hardship, it was about her overstepping her role. He started avoiding her, taking his meals in his study and using the back staircase to bypass the main living areas. He wanted to reinforce the distance, to remind her and himself of the nature of their arrangement. This was a business deal, not a blossoming friendship or a budding love story. He needed her to be a compliant part of the project, not an active participant in his life. Her kindness was a distraction he couldn't afford. The irony, of course, was that her gestures were entirely selfless. Serenity saw a man living in a beautiful cage and, out of pure instinct, wanted to offer a small measure of comfort. She wasn't seeking his approval or a change in their contract. She was simply being herself. But in Colton's world, every action had an angle, every kindness a hidden price. He couldn't comprehend a gesture made simply for the sake of being kind. His frustration was building, a silent tension growing within the mansion's walls. He was the powerful billionaire, the master of his domain, yet he felt his control slipping in the face of simple, unasked-for compassion. He was on the verge of confronting her, of reminding her of her place. But before he could, an encounter would take place that didn't involve him directly, one that would force him to see her in a completely different light. The confrontation he'd been dreading came, just not in the way he expected. It was his fiancée, Amelia, a woman as polished and heartless as the marble floors, who delivered the blow. Colton was in his study when he heard voices from the hallway, Amelia's, sharp and dripping with condescension, and Serenity's, soft and measured. He paused, an unwilling eavesdropper to a conversation he knew he should stop, but couldn't turn away from. Destiny was at work again. "You must understand your place here," Amelia sneered, her voice carrying clearly. "You're a vessel, a temporary container, a surrogate. Don't get any foolish ideas that you're part of this family." The cruelty was designed to inflict maximum heartbreak, to put Serenity firmly in her place as a hired womb. Colton felt a muscle tighten in his jaw. While Amelia's words were harsh, they echoed his own initial, unspoken sentiments about the contract. He waited for the emotional outburst, the tears, the angry retort. That's how the women in his circle reacted, with drama and hysterics. But from Serenity, there's only a moment of silence. Then, her voice came, calm and filled with a quiet, unshakable dignity. "I understand my role perfectly," she said, her tone even. "My purpose is to help bring a child into the world. It's the most important job I can imagine. I don't need any other title than that." The response was a surprise plot twist. There was no weakness in her words, no hint of shame. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with an integrity that completely disarmed the attack. Amelia was left sputtering, her cruelty rendered impotent against Serenity's quiet strength. From his study, Colton felt a strange and unfamiliar sensation, a prickle of admiration. It was a feeling that unnerved him, because it was directed at the woman he was trying so hard to keep at arm's length. Serenity's reaction was a masterclass in overcoming adversity without aggression. She hadn't stooped to Amelia's level. She had risen above it, demonstrating a kind of power Colton wasn't familiar with, the power of self-worth. It was a secret weapon he had never seen deployed on the corporate battlefields he knew so well. This wasn't the reaction of a simple hired surrogate. It was the response of a woman of profound character. This small, overheard moment planted a seed of doubt in Colton's mind. He had seen her kindness, and it had annoyed him. But now he had seen her strength, and it intrigued him. He had believed he understood her, had her neatly categorized in his mind. But her dignified response to such ugliness suggested there were hidden depths to Serenity Morgan. And soon, during a moment of genuine fear, he would see that strength up close. The sterile white walls of the clinic felt colder than usual. Routine checkups had become a part of their shared reality, another scheduled milestone in the project of creating an heir. Colton always attended, not out of concern, but out of a CEO's need for oversight. But today was different. The doctor's brow furrowed, his cheerful demeanor replaced by a professional focus that immediately set Colton on edge. There was a complication, a potential risk, a scare. As the doctor explained the situation in low, technical terms, Colton felt a surge of something he rarely experienced: helplessness. This was a problem his money couldn't solve, a negotiation he had no power in. He looked over at Serenity, expecting to see the panic that was beginning to coil in his own stomach. He expected tears, fear, the emotional fragility he associated with high-stakes situations. He saw none of it. It was a genuine surprise. Instead, Serenity's face was a mask of calm focus. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach, her breathing steady. She listened intently to the doctor, asking clear, intelligent questions. There was no hysteria, no drama. There was only a quiet, resolute bravery that was utterly captivating. She wasn't just a passive vessel, she was a warrior standing guard, her calm a shield against the encroaching fear. It was an incredible display of overcoming a terrifying moment. In that clinic room, their roles experienced a sudden plot twist. He, the powerful billionaire CEO, was the one who felt unnerved and out of control. And she, the hired surrogate, was the pillar of strength, the calm center of the storm. He saw in her a resilience he'd never witnessed in Amelia or any of the other women in his life, who would have crumbled into hysterics. Serenity's strength wasn't loud or performative, it was a deep, quiet well of courage. The scare, thankfully, turned out to be a false alarm, a minor issue that was easily resolved. But the emotional impact of the moment lingered long after they left the clinic. The drive back to the mansion was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the cold, awkward silence of their contract, it was a silence filled with Colton's dawning respect. He had seen behind the curtain of her quiet demeanor and found something extraordinary. He had dismissed her kindness as a nuisance and been intrigued by her dignity. Now he was in awe of her strength. Colton Griffin, a man who prided himself on being able to read people, realized he had completely misjudged Serenity Morgan. He was beginning to understand that the contract he had written couldn't possibly contain the true measure of this woman. And he was about to discover she had even more secret talents hidden away. One rainy afternoon, seeking refuge from a particularly grueling conference call, Colton found himself wandering the quieter winds of the mansion. He was drawn by a sliver of light from under the door of a small, unused sitting room. Pushing it open, he found Serenity curled up on a window seat, so engrossed in the notebook on her lap that she didn't hear him enter. He expected to see her reading a magazine or lost in thought, but what he saw was another surprise. Her hand moved with a fluid grace, a pencil dancing across the page. He moved closer, his curiosity piqued, and peered over her shoulder. The page wasn't filled with idle doodles or diary entries. It was covered in intricate, stunningly beautiful sketches of furniture. The designs were modern yet warm, elegant yet functional. They were brilliant, professional-grade concepts that spoke of a deep, hidden talent he had no idea existed. A secret gift. She finally looked up, startled, a blush rising on her cheeks as she quickly closed the notebook. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't." She stammered as if she'd been caught doing something wrong, but Colton barely heard her. He was too busy processing this new information. This was not the work of an amateur. The design showed a keen understanding of space, form, and aesthetics. This revealed an intelligence and creativity he had completely and utterly underestimated. "These are incredible," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. It was a genuine, unguarded reaction, a rare confession of admiration from the guarded CEO. He asked to see more, and hesitantly, she opened the notebook again. Page after page revealed a portfolio of innovative ideas, each one more impressive than the last. This was the work of a designer, an artist, a creator, not just a surrogate. This discovery was a profound plot twist in his perception of her. He had defined her by a single role, the one he had paid for. He had seen her kindness, her dignity, her strength, but he had still subconsciously filed her away as simple. Now, he was confronted with undeniable proof of her sharp creative mind. Her intelligence was not just emotional, it was practical, tangible, and frankly marketable. As he left her to her sketching, his own world felt a little smaller, a little less impressive. His success was built on numbers and assets, on leveraging power. Her talent was built on vision and beauty, on creating something from nothing. It was a humbling realization for the proud billionaire. He now knew he was living with a woman of many hidden layers, and he was beginning to feel a pull, a desire to uncover more. That chance would come sooner than he thought. The dinner party was Amelia's idea, a gathering of the city's elite designed to flaunt her status as the future Mrs. Griffin. It was a night of fake smiles and sharp-edged compliments, a battlefield where social standing was won and lost. Amelia, in a stunning power play of cruelty, insisted Serenity join them for a short while, framing it as a modern, inclusive gesture. But her true intent was clear. She wanted to parade Serenity as a curiosity, to publicly humiliate her. The moment came after the main course. With all eyes on her, Amelia turned to Serenity with a saccharine smile. "It must be so fascinating," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "to be a part of this world, even for a little while. To carry a child for a man like Colton. Tell us, what was your life like before this arrangement?" The question hung in the air, a baited hook designed to highlight Serenity's lower status and trigger a predictable, emotional response. It was a planned moment of heartbreak. Serenity, ever poised, simply smiled faintly, about to offer another of her dignified, disarming responses. But before she could speak, something shifted. A plot twist nobody, least of all Serenity, saw coming. Colton, who had been watching the exchange with a thunderous expression, placed his wine glass down with a definitive click. "Her life," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like steel, "is one of grace and integrity, Amelia. Something many people in this room could learn from." The surprise was so profound that a collective silent gasp seemed to ripple through the table. Colton Griffin, the cold and calculating CEO, had not only intervened, but had publicly defended his surrogate against his own fiancée. He turned his gaze on Amelia, a cold fire in his eyes she had never seen before. "Serenity is a guest in my home, and she will be treated with respect. This conversation is over." It was a stunning act of redemption for his earlier detachment. Amelia was speechless, her face a mask of shock and fury. The power dynamic at the table had been irrevocably altered. Colton had drawn a line in the sand, and he had chosen to stand on Serenity's side. For Serenity, this was the most emotional moment yet. To be seen, to be valued, to be defended by the very man whose contract had defined her as a temporary fixture in his life. It was overwhelming. Later that night, the mansion buzzed with the unspoken fallout of that dinner. Amelia's public humiliation was a secondary concern to the real story, the billionaire's unexpected defense. The professional arrangement had been cracked wide open, revealing something far more complex underneath. The walls had been breached, not by Serenity's kindness, but by Colton's own surprising actions. And now, for the first time, they were about to truly talk. The aftermath of the disastrous dinner party left a strange quiet in its wake. Amelia had departed in a storm of fury, leaving a void that was quickly filled by a new, palpable tension between Colton and Serenity. Later that night, he found her in the library, not sketching, but staring out at the rain-streaked window, lost in thought. The air was thick with things unsaid, with the emotional gravity of his public defense of her. He knew he couldn't retreat back behind his CEO facade. "Thank you," she said softly, without turning around. "You didn't have to do that." Her voice was a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He had upheld the letter of their contract for months, and now he had just set fire to its unspoken rules. This was the moment for a confession, not of love, but of a truth he was only just beginning to understand himself. The love story, if there was one, was just beginning to write its first, hesitant chapter. "Yes, I did," Colton replied, stepping further into the room. "What Amelia did was unacceptable. What I've allowed, through my silence, was unacceptable." The admission cost him a crack in the armor of the infallible billionaire. They began to talk, really talk, for the first time. The conversation wasn't about the baby or the contract. It was about her dreams of being a designer, his lonely childhood, the pressures of his empire. It was a heart-aching exchange of vulnerabilities. For hours they shared stories, their secret selves emerging in the safety of the dimly lit library. He learned about the hardship she'd faced, the quiet overcoming of life struggles that had forged her incredible strength. She saw past the powerful CEO and glimpsed the man underneath, a man burdened by expectation and starved of genuine connection. The walls of the contract crumbled, replaced by a bridge of shared humanity. Their destiny felt intertwined in that moment. It was a conversation that changed everything. The professional distance evaporated, replaced by a fragile, tentative intimacy. He saw her not as the surrogate, but as Serenity, a woman of intelligence, warmth, and surprising depth. She saw him not as her employer, but as Colton, a man with his own heartbreaks and hidden kindness. The emotional connection was no longer a risk to be managed, it was a reality to be acknowledged. As dawn approached, a comfortable silence settled between them. The contract was still there, a legal document filed away in his office, but it had lost its power. They had connected on a level that transcended business, a deeply personal bond forged in a single transformative night. He felt a lightness he hadn't in years, but a new problem was on the horizon, a multi-million-dollar business crisis that had plagued him for weeks. And the solution would come from the most unexpected place. For weeks, Colton had been wrestling with a corporate beast. A multi-million-dollar logistics problem was crippling one of his biggest subsidiaries, and his team of high-priced analysts and consultants was stumped. Had spent countless nights staring at spreadsheets and projections, the stress mounting. The powerful CEO, the man who could solve anything with enough capital and force, was stuck. The pressure was immense, a weight that even his vast fortune couldn't lift. One evening, he was in his study, papers spread across his desk, his head in his hands when Serenity entered quietly with a cup of tea. She hesitated at the door, seeing his frustration. "Is everything all right, Colton?" she asked softly. On a whim, driven by the new intimacy between them and a sense of utter desperation, he decided to tell her. He explained the complex issue, not expecting her to understand, but simply needing to voice the problem out loud. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed in concentration. He used industry jargon and complex metrics, but she didn't seem lost. When he finished his rant, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the chaotic flowchart on his wall. Then, she pointed to a single box in the diagram. "Forgive me if this is too simple," she began, "but it reminds me of arranging furniture in a difficult room. Sometimes the answer isn't to add more pieces, but to change the flow. What if you just bypass this entire distribution hub?" It was a breathtakingly simple suggestion. So simple, in fact, that his entire team of experts had overlooked it. They were too close to the problem, too mired in the data. Serenity, with her designer's mind, saw the issue not as a series of numbers, but as a problem of flow and function. It was a surprise, a genuine plot twist in his professional life. Her solution was elegant, efficient, and would save the company millions. It was brilliant. Colton stared at her, then at the board, his mind racing. It worked. Her simple, intuitive observation had untangled a knot that had confounded the best minds he could hire. This wasn't just hidden intelligence, it was a different kind of intelligence. A creative, holistic perspective that his world of rigid logic desperately needed. The surrogate he had hired to carry his heir had just saved a cornerstone of his empire with a casual observation. The implications were staggering. He realized the true scope of what had underestimated. She possessed a wisdom that went far beyond kindness or strength. She had a mind that could see solutions where others only saw problems. His admiration for her deepened into something closer to awe. She was more than just a heart-aching presence in his home. She was a hidden asset, a secret weapon. And he was starting to realize he didn't want to let her go. The resolution of his business crisis marked a definitive shift in Colton. The admiration he felt for Serenity's mind combined with the warmth of their late-night talk, had blossomed into a full-blown need to be near her. The powerful CEO, a man whose schedule was planned down to the minute, suddenly found his days filled with unstructured time. He began making excuses, finding reasons to be in the same room as her, his actions a quiet confession of his growing feelings. He'd forget papers in the library where she liked to read, just to have a reason to enter and strike up a conversation. He'd suggest they sample the new menu the chef was planning, turning a solitary meal into a shared experience. These were flimsy pretexts, but they were all he had. The billionaire who could have anything he wanted was now orchestrating small, clumsy moments just to hear her laugh or to see her smile. It was a new and humbling experience. He realized with a clarity that was both thrilling and terrifying that her presence was changing him. The sterile mansion no longer felt empty. The silence was no longer lonely, it was peaceful. Serenity's quiet kindness had seeped into the walls, into him, bringing a light and warmth that his immense fortune could never buy. His life had been a landscape of gray, and she was, quite simply, color. It was a deeply heart-aching revelation. This was no longer about the contract or the heir. This was about her. He found himself watching her, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on her sketches, the soft look in her eyes when she talked about her dreams. This was the beginning of a true love story, one he was stumbling into with all the grace of a man who had never learned. The steps. His destiny, he was beginning to see, was inextricably linked to the surprising, incredible woman. He started to dread the approaching due date, not because of the responsibilities of fatherhood, but because it signified the end of their arrangement. The contract stipulated that once the baby was born, she would leave. The thought of her walking out that door, of the mansion returning to its cold, silent state, caused a pang of heartbreak so sharp it took his breath away. He was the CEO who had everything, but he was about to lose the one thing he was realizing he couldn't live without. His focus shifted from overcoming business challenges to the personal challenge of his own heart. How could he have been so blind? He had viewed her as a means to an end, a temporary part of a plan. But now, as the final days of her pregnancy ticked by, he knew with absolute certainty that she wasn't just a part of the plan. She was the entire point. But the clock was ticking, and the reality of their situation was about to come crashing down. The day came with a sudden urgent rush, sweeping away all the carefully laid plans and unspoken feelings in a tide of raw, unfiltered reality. The clinical precision of the project dissolved in the corridors of the hospital, replaced by the messy, beautiful, and terrifying chaos of childbirth. Colton, who had always been a man of control, found himself utterly powerless, a spectator to the most profound event of his life. His CEO title meant nothing here. He stood by Serenity's side, not as an employer, but as a terrified, awestruck partner. He saw the sweat on her brow, the grit in her eyes, the incredible strength she summoned from a place deep within. This was not the surrogate from the contract. This was a woman of immense power and courage, engaged in the primal act of creation. All his wealth, all his influence, felt laughably insignificant in the face of her raw, determined effort. It was the ultimate act of overcoming. Then the world seemed to stop. A tiny, perfect cry cut through the air, a sound that rearranged every molecule in Colton's body. The nurse placed the baby, his son, into his arms. He looked down at the small, wrinkled face and the cold, logical walls he had built around his. Heart didn't just crack, they shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't an heir. This wasn't a legacy. This was his son. The emotional weight of that simple truth was crushing. In that moment, holding his child, he looked over at Serenity. Her face was tired but luminous, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and a deep, soul-stirring love as she looked at the baby. And in her eyes, he saw the whole secret story. The love she had nurtured for this child, a love she was prepared to walk away from out of sheer dignity and respect for their agreement. The thought was a spear of heartbreak through his chest. The contract, that cold clinical document, was now a meaningless piece of paper. It was a monument to his own blindness. How could he ever have thought that a moment this sacred, this transformative, could be governed by clauses and payments? This wasn't a transaction, it was a miracle. A miracle that Serenity had made possible. His destiny wasn't just this child, it was tied to the woman who brought him into the world. He watched her as she held their son for the first time, a quiet, heart-aching scene of profound connection. He saw the love story he had almost missed, the redemption he desperately needed, and the family he suddenly, fiercely wanted. But the reality of their situation remained. The contract was fulfilled, and now, the hardest part of their agreement was about to begin. The days following the birth were a strange, bittersweet limbo. The joy of the new baby was a constant presence, a beautiful, undeniable fact that filled the mansion's rooms. But underneath it all ran a current of impending loss. The contract had been fulfilled, the final payment had been transferred. And just as she had arrived with a single suitcase, Serenity Morgan began to quietly pack it, her movements graceful and deliberate, belying the storm of heartbreak within her. She had known this day was coming from the very beginning. She had steeled herself for it, rehearsed this departure in her mind 1,000 times. But rehearsals are no match for reality. Every time she looked at the baby, a piece of her soul cracked. This was a love story she had to end by her own hand. Leaving him was the hardest thing she would ever have to do, but her dignity demanded. A deal was a deal. Colton watched her, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He saw the quiet sadness in her eyes, the way she would linger for a moment longer by the crib, her touch gentle and loving. There was no drama, no tearful pleas. She was the epitome of grace under pressure, a portrait of quiet dignity in the face of unbearable emotional pain. Her strength was a constant, heart-aching surprise, even now. He tried to talk to her, to find the words to ask her to stay, but they wouldn't come. What could he say? The entire foundation of their relationship was a business arrangement that he himself had designed. To change the terms now felt like a confession of his own monumental mistake, an admission that his cold, billionaire logic had been wrong from the start. He was paralyzed by his own creation, a CEO trapped in a contract of his own making. The day of her departure was gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the mood within the mansion. Her taxi was waiting. She said her goodbyes to the staffer, kindness evident even in her sorrow. Her final stop was the nursery. She kissed the baby's forehead, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. It was a secret, silent farewell, a mother's heartbreak hidden from the world. She walked towards the door where Colton stood, frozen and useless. He could feel her resolve, her determination to see this through with the same integrity she had shown from day one. He wanted to shout, to beg, to confess everything, but he said nothing. He just watched as the woman who had brought light and life into his home prepared to walk out of it forever, leaving him with the air he wanted and an emptiness he never expected. The click of the front door closing behind Serenity echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the baby began to cry from the nursery upstairs. Colton, the powerful CEO, the new father, felt a wave of panic wash over him. He had his heir, the fulfillment of his grand plan. He had everything he thought he wanted. So why did his victory feel so much like a devastating loss? In the hours and days that followed, the truth settled in with a crushing weight. The mansion, which had briefly tasted life and warmth, reverted to its former state, a cold, sterile, and unbearably empty shell. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was oppressive. The echoes of her soft laughter and quiet footsteps were gone, leaving a void that the baby's cries couldn't fill. The heart of the home had been ripped out. He walked through the rooms, each one a fresh reminder of her absence. The library felt wrong without her curled in the window seat. The kitchen island seemed vast and lonely without the simple, heart-aching gestures of her presence, like a plate of cookies or a cup of tea. He had thought the baby would be the one to fill the emptiness of his life, but he was wrong. It was a shocking plot twist of the heart. The baby was a joy, but Serenity had been the joy's source. Colton finally understood. He hadn't just engaged a surrogate, he had invited a soul into his home. A soul of immense kindness, strength, and quiet intelligence. She had been the light, the warmth, the life. The baby was the beautiful outcome of their time together, but she was the experience itself. The love story he had been blind to was not about the child, but about the connection he had forged with her. A confession he now made to the empty rooms. He felt a desperate need for some kind of redemption, a way to undo his monumental error. The heartbreak was a physical ache, a constant companion as he navigated the first days of fatherhood alone. He had treated her with the detached logic of a billionaire, and in doing so, he had pushed away the greatest treasure he had ever found. His destiny felt broken, incomplete. He had to find her. He had to try to fix this. But where would he even start? She had disappeared as quietly as she had arrived, determined to maintain her dignity. He felt a surge of despair, a fear that he had lost her for good. Then, while tidying the nursery, trying to create some order in his chaotic new reality, his hand brushed against something tucked beneath the crib's mattress. It was a small hand-stitched teddy bear, made from a soft, worn flannel. The craftsmanship was simple but filled with an undeniable love. It was a heart-aching, humble gift, a stark contrast to the expensive, store-bought toys that filled the rest of the nursery. Tucked under the bear's ribbon was a small folded piece of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the note. It wasn't a letter of anger or accusation. It was a letter to his son. The note was a quiet confession of a mother's love, written with a simple, aching sincerity. She told the baby how much he was cherished, how he was a piece of her heart that she would carry with her always. She encouraged him to be a man of kindness and integrity, to value people over possessions. It was a testament to her character, a final selfless act of love for a child she knew she couldn't keep. The words were a soft, devastating blow to Colton's soul. At the bottom of the note, there was a short postscript, and this was addressed to him. Colton, it read, "Your greatest treasure is not the empire you've built, but the man you have the potential to be. Please be that man for him. Show him the kindness that I know is in your heart." The directness and faith of her words, the belief in a goodness he wasn't sure he possessed, utterly broke him. It was a plea for his redemption. This note was the final plot twist, the last secret she had left behind. It wasn't a demand or a regretful goodbye. It was a gift of trust. She wasn't just walking away, she was entrusting him with the two most important things in her world, her child and her hope for Colton's own transformation. The depth of her character, her capacity for selfless love and forgiveness, was more valuable than his entire billionaire fortune. The heartbreak was sharp and clarifying. He saw his entire life with a brutal, new perspective. He had been chasing legacy, power, and control, when the real prize, a life of genuine connection and love, had been living under his own roof. He had let her walk away. He had let his pride and his cold, stupid contract dictate the course of their shared destiny. The surrogate had shown more character than the CEO. He looked from the note to the teddy bear, then to his son sleeping peacefully in the crib. Her final words echoed in his mind. "Show him the kindness that I know is in your heart." He knew what he had to do. There was no more time for pride or hesitation. He grabbed his keys, his heart pounding with a desperate, new purpose. He had to find her before it was too late, before she disappeared forever. The bus station was a place of transient souls, of arrivals and departures, a gray purgatory of impatience and fatigue. And there she was, Serenity Morgan, sitting on a hard plastic bench, her single suitcase at her feet, looking small and alone in the bustling crowd. She was staring at a bus schedule, her face a mask of weary resolve. Finding her here, in this anonymous place, felt like a miracle of destiny, a last chance he didn't deserve. He ran towards her, calling her name. Serenity. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of fear. He skidded to a stop in front of her, out of breath, his mind a chaotic mess of apologies and pleas. "Don't go," he gasped, the words tumbling out. "Please, don't go. I was wrong. The contract, the money, it's all meaningless. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. Please come home." She looked at him, her expression softening from shock to a deep, resonant sadness. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the raw, unfiltered confession of his heartbreak. This wasn't the powerful CEO, this was a broken man begging for a second chance. He continued to ramble, telling her how empty the house was, how he'd found the note, how he finally understood. He was begging for redemption in the middle of a bus station. She raised a hand to quiet him, a gesture of gentle authority. She stood up, closing the distance between them. He expected her to say "I love you" or "it's too late." Instead, she looked him directly in the eye, her gaze steady and clear, and she whispered the 3 secret words. The same 3 words from that day in the foyer, but this time he understood their true meaning. "He needs you," she said softly, but with unshakable conviction. The words weren't about her love for him or his for her. They were the ultimate plot twist. They were a selfless, heart-aching plea that recentered the entire universe. It wasn't about what he owned or what the contract said. It was about his responsibility, his role. In that instant, Colton Griffin, the billionaire, died, and Colton Griffin, the father, was born. The words "he needs you" were a key that unlocked his heart, revealing his true purpose. Tears streamed down his face, in front of God and everyone. In that bus station, he dropped to his knees. "No," he cried, his voice thick with emotion. "He needs us. I need you." He renounced everything he wasted: transactional life, the cold contracts, the empty pursuit of power. "Your kindness, your strength, your worth is the greatest treasure I could ever find. Serenity, please, build a real family with me." It was the ultimate confession, the ultimate overcoming, the beginning of their true love story. What an absolutely incredible journey of the heart. We witnessed a story that started as a cold, clinical contract and blossomed into a powerful testament to human connection. It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes our greatest plans are meaningless in the face of destiny. We saw a powerful billionaire, Colton Griffin, learn the hard way that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in moments of kindness, acts of redemption, and the courage to make a heart-aching confession. And we saw a woman, Serenity Morgan, prove that integrity and love are the most powerful forces in the universe. From a lonely mansion to a heartfelt plea in a bus station, their love story was filled with one emotional plot twist after another. It forces us to ask ourselves, what are the contracts we make in our own lives? Where might we be blind to the treasure standing right in front of us? This story of overcoming heartbreak shows that it's never too late to rewrite our own ending and choose a life built on love rather than logic. Now we would love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, as it truly helps our community grow. More importantly, we want to know what you think. Share in the comments below what moment impacted you the most. Was it when Colton defended Serenity at the dinner party, or her final selfless words to him? We're also so curious to hear your take on that ending. Did you expect a different outcome, or did you love the way their story concluded? Let us know if the finale met your hopes or if you had another plot twist in mind. If you want to be a part of more stories like this one, filled with emotion and inspiration, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. And while you wait, feel free to watch some of our older videos. Have a whole library of them waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with us.